have a member certified closed session for us? With that motion, item 3.2.
Go ahead.
I certify that to the best of each member's knowledge, the Williamsburg-James City County School Board, while in closed session, discussed only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements as stated in Virginia law, and that only such public matters were identified in the motion convening the closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered.
Thank you for that, Ms. Hummel. Is there a second?
Second.
I'm not sure who that was. Thank you, Ms. Ortega. For the second, Ms. Aller.
Ms. Hummel.
Aye.
Mrs. Hunley.
Aye.
Mrs. Ortega.
Aye.
Mrs. Young. Aye. Dr. Beers.
Aye.
Mrs. Donner.
Aye.
Mr. Dowell.
Aye. And for the viewing public, Ms. Young is joining us from home via Zoom. And here, Ms. Young. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
Chair, I move to approve the agenda as presented.
Thank you, Ms. Hundley. Second. Thank you, Dr. Beers, for that second. And any discussion? Ms. Aller?
Mrs. Hunley.
Aye.
Mrs. Ortega.
Aye.
Mrs. Young. Aye. Dr. Beers.
Aye.
Mrs. Donner.
Aye.
Ms. Hummel.
Aye.
Mr. Dowell.
Aye. And we'll turn it over to Dr. Herron for her superintendent's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yesterday was National Custodian Appreciation Day. WJCC custodial staff members work year-round to maintain safe and healthy spaces in all WJCC schools and offices. Let's take a look at what these hidden heroes did to prepare our schools for students' return this fall.
Our custodians do more than clean our buildings. They build a rapport with students, positively encourage staff and students, and continuously make our schools clean and inviting.
And I just love it when it looks good and I just see everyone smiling and bright. That's what I love, summertime.
Our daily goal as custodians is to provide a healthy and safe learning environment. Right now, they are putting a shine on every surface so staff and students are excited for their first day back to school.
I love the kids because they always willing to help me.
I can't thank each of our custodians enough for the job they do every day in our schools.
Thank you so much to all of our custodial staff for your contributions to the WJCC schools community. We really appreciate all that you do. And we're always looking to add new members to our team of talented custodians. If you're interested in joining this incredible team, please visit our website and click on Careers under Custodial. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This concludes my report for this evening.
Thank you, Dr. Herron. Any members have a board report this evening? Okay, pretty quiet. I also want to thank our custodial team, every single one. I think I remark on it every year, just how impressed I am when I go into these schools and they know me because they know my kids and they know my kids by name, and I know we're not unique in that way. I just really appreciate the impact that they have in our students' lives. So really appreciate all of our custodians. We'll move on to item 5 on our agenda. Item 5.1, we're going to review revisions to the 23-24 school year calendar. Dr. Herron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This evening, Mr. Keever will bring 2 agenda items to do with this year's and next year's school calendar. Mr. Keever.
Thank you, Dr. Herron. Good evening, members of the board. This evening, our first agenda item is to look at an administrative recommendation to modify the 23-24 calendar. That modification, from our perspective administratively, allows for us to host graduation day for the class of 2024 on June the 14th. We are excited to be able to move towards designating a graduation day. We are also excited to be able to move forward to that graduation taking place at Kaplan Arena versus a little bit longer drive, which is what we had in 2023. The modifications themselves would include designating June 10th and June 11th as early release days at the high school level, June 12th and June 13th would be pre-K through 12 early release, and the 13th of June would then become the last day of school. In our current calendar, June 14 is the last day of school. By making June 13 the last day of school, it leaves open that Friday the 14th. It's also a teacher work day contractually. We feel like this is the best scenario to be able to conduct our graduations and also have our staff members participate while still on their contractual obligations. Just to give you a visual of what that might look like, I've highlighted the blue arrow, which indicates the 13th is the last day of school. I've also highlighted in the bottom right-hand corner of the slide the idea that if we were to have inclement weather, there is a possibility that the superintendent would need to designate a staff day or a holiday in the second semester as a makeup day. We're not anticipating that necessarily, but do want to at least advise you of that possibility. As an example, that April 26th staff day or CLP day, which is currently designated as a student holiday, could be one that we look at if we had a significant amount of inclement weather and needed that day as a makeup time. Happy to answer any questions.
Miss Honor.
How does this affect our 180 or 181 days of instructional days?
Good question, Ms. Donner. Right now, we are scheduled for 180 instructional days. This calendar modification would take us to 179 instructional days. However, we more than surpassed the 990 clock hours. Right now in state code is 180 instructional days or 990 clock hours. We build our calendars around the 180 days because we believe that that's the appropriate way to build the calendar. That calendar was built and approved prior to us having an inclination from Kaplan Arena that we could get in there for graduation.
Thank you.
Sorga?
Is graduation typically on a Saturday though, or is this a deviation from? No.
The last couple years, we've done graduation on a Friday. We've done, the last 2 years for certain. The year prior to that, when we were at Warner Stadium, we did 2 on Friday and 1 on Saturday. Prior to that time, there might have been some graduations on Saturdays, but I think our preference would be able to schedule those on days that our teachers are under contract, especially at the high school level, to be able to be there and participate without having to make a choice.
So,
And Kaplan Arena, William & Mary has assured us that Kaplan Arena will be ready by the 14th of June?
We have been green-lighted to utilize Kaplan on June 14. We're still working through some of the specificity around specific times and order, but we do have a green light to move forward with Kaplan on the 14th.
All right.
sounds great. All right.
We intend to ask you to approve this formally at your next board meeting. We will allude to our community this evening that it's under consideration, and then move forward with some of the pieces around the graduation announcement after formal approval.
Move on to item 5.2, the 24-25 school year calendar options.
Yes, sir. Thank you. The board may recall that when we presented a calendar in, I guess it was the fall of last year, towards November and maybe even into December, we previewed a couple of calendar options, both for 23-24 and then 24-25. The calendar committee at that time had worked under these 5 categories as the main considerations for their work. As I mentioned previously, 180 instructional days, the focus on student achievement and staff wellness, the idea of strategically placing throughout the year opportunities for teachers to have collaborative time, professional learning time, planning time. We felt it was important as a committee to maintain and or consider an even earlier pre-Labor Day start. You may remember, I'm going to show you what that looked like in just a couple minutes. And then obviously ample time around the winter holiday. You may even recall that the board asked us to go back to the community and get some data around the 2-week break at the winter holiday, because the initial calendar we proposed for 23-24 might have been a 9-day break versus a 10-day break. The the last time we shared information with you, we indicated that the 24-25 calendar was kind of looking like two versions. The first version would have us starting on Wednesday the 21st and then ending school on Friday the 6th. This would be even earlier than that pre-Labor Day start that we've gotten accustomed to over the last several years. The second version of the calendar would begin on August the 26th and close out on Wednesday, June the 11th. In an opportunity to meet with that committee again at the beginning of this particular school year, and I will say that folks were a little bit surprised that we were reconvening the calendar committee in August we hadn't even necessarily gotten too far into the school year, but the idea is we want to be in a 2-year stead and want folks to have a 2-year understanding of what the calendar looks like. So we met 3 weeks ago to kind of talk about pieces of it. Our regional counterparts are currently generally on board with the idea of starting the Monday preceding Labor Day, but our counterparts are not quite ready to go any earlier than that. And what we are bringing forward as a recommendation is to begin school on Monday, August the 26th, and conclude school on June the 11th. More instructional time for sure. So here are the key dates around that calendar. Monday, August 26th, students return, utilizing a similar format to what we are utilizing this year, the CLP Day, a student holiday on Monday and Tuesday, November 4 and 5. 3-day holiday break, 27, 28, 29. It's a full 2 weeks at the winter holiday, December 23rd through Jan 3rd. Spring break as agreed to by the Peninsula School Divisions, that first full week of April, the 7th through the 11th. And then the last day of instruction for students would be Wednesday, June 11th. So to give you a graphic representation of what that looks like, this is the way it lays out for you. One thing that I will note on the August 30 date, a fair amount of discussion amongst teachers specifically around whether that day could be, in addition to a student holiday, a teacher holiday, that there was a preference for the teacher contract to pick up a day somewhere else and have that as a 4-day weekend for teachers as well. So genuinely we're recommending that it would be a 4-day instructional week for students and teachers. Our 12-month staff would be working still on the 30th, have the opportunity to take leave as necessary, and then we would start back in earnest on September 3rd. October 4th is a student holiday or a teacher CLP day, those 2 days that I referenced in November. Around the Thanksgiving holiday, there was some discussion within the calendar committee in both iterations of that group about, do you take a full week at Thanksgiving? Do you do a half day on that Wednesday? And as we started looking at our regional counterparts and talked internally, the idea that our school division for the last number of years has been on a 3-day Thanksgiving break. We weren't ready necessarily to support a full 5 days, and we felt like an early dismissal day on the 27th really didn't help anybody. That you have a fairly low student attendance rate. Those staff members that have travel plans are also scrambling to try to figure that out. So we just felt like to go ahead and do a 3-day break. It is only a 2-day instructional week. School would be in session until December 20th. Again, those 2 full weeks at the December and January timeframe, starting back again on January 6, 2025, Martin Luther King Day on the 20th, and ending the first semester on the 24th of January, with the 27th of January being a CLP Day student holiday. Let me pause there and see if there are any questions before I go to the spring semester.
I think we're good.
Thank you. Spring semester, there is President's Day on the 17th of February, another CLP Day on the 3rd of March. It's a student holiday. We do feel like preceding the spring vacation, we want to give teachers an opportunity to close out the 3rd marking period. So we have scheduled that as a pre-K through 12 early release day. Generally, we try to have grades closed out so that when you come back in the 4th marking period, it's a clean start after spring break. There is not currently in the calendar, and we're not recommending it, that there be another student holiday at the end of April or the beginning of May. As we looked at the way the schedule is set up for this year for that year, 24-25, with AP testing and SOL testing, we really felt like from spring break to Memorial Day was the right kind of push in terms of students being in school on a daily basis with teachers gearing up for those important assessments. Designating the 10th and 11th as early release days across the board for pre-K through 12. Last day of school is on the 11th, and our goal would be for graduation to occur potentially on June 12th. To give you a sense of the teacher collaboration, learning planning days, and student holidays, there are 5 built into the calendar. There are 3 early release days for all WJCC students that are built into the calendar. Also want to share with you our initial look at how the marking periods break down. I've shared this with the board previously. In an ideal world, it would be 90 days in the first 2 marking periods and 90 days in the second 2 marking periods. In trying to place marking period ends at potentially the end of a week or around a day where we can make it a records closeout, sometimes you get into 91 and 89. So in this particular case, it'd be 91 days in semester 1 and 89 days in semester 2. We feel like that's workable as long as everybody knows it in advance. Our next steps include later this afternoon sharing with our community the tentative calendar that we've presented it to the board, and we seek some feedback. We'll gather that feedback beginning today through Friday the 13th of October, synthesize that feedback, and be able to share with the board any outliers within that, and ask the board to take action on the 17th of October.
All right, questions for Ms. Beaver? Ms. Young, do you have a question or a comment?
Just a comment, yes, I just wanted to say I really, please thank the calendar committee for maintaining that 2-week break for our teachers at the winter break, please.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, that had been a good topic of discussion, I think, last year or 2 years ago, and I appreciate keeping that in consideration as this calendar was considered, the recommendation was considered. Did you have something?
I noticed that the graduation would be on a Thursday, which would be different because we were just talking about them being Friday, Saturday, so people traveling would need to know early enough that it's a Thursday, not a Friday.
It would be our goal it's always our goal to release the date for graduation and as early as we possibly can once a venue has been secured and a contract is in place. Additionally, that Thursday would continue to be a contractual day for teachers, which again provides us maximum opportunity for those teachers to participate and be a part of the ceremony.
Another item of discussion I recall from a few years back was a recommendation that we started the school year on a known religious holiday, so I just figured I'd Google check and make sure that that was covered. No known religious holiday, but the 26th is National Dog Day, National Cherry Popsicle Day, and National Toilet Paper Day, so I think we're safe.
Well, it does open up a lot of opportunities for us for first day of school celebrations.
Oh yeah, there's that.
National Toilet Paper Day.
Thank you for your work and to the committee as well.
Bring your dog to school.
Bring your dog to school day?
Oh, careful that we might want to talk about the bring your dog to school day policy before we get
We'll need
too
the
far
toilet
ahead.
paper if we do.
Thank you, Mr. Dow.
Thank you, sir. All right, move on to item 5.3. We have a purchase request to review for the Stonehouse Elementary boiler.
Thank you, Mr. Dial. Mr. Snipe's going to inform us about this item this evening. It's to do with a malfunctioning boiler at Stonehouse and the need for replacement. Thank you, Mr. Snipes.
Thank you, Dr. Herron. Good evening, School Board Chair, School Board members, and Dr. Herron. Tonight's proposed agenda item supports Goal 4 of the strategic plan and is brought for your consideration and review of the purchase request and budget transfer for the Stonehouse Elementary boilers. Stonehouse currently has 2 boilers. One was installed in 2000, another one was replaced in 2006, and one of those boilers has developed multiple leaks. which is causing a breakdown which is caused by a breakdown in the insulation system. The building needs two systems, two boilers to operate effectively during our winter months, and so we are requesting that both be replaced at this time because they'll both be way beyond their useful life of 20 years. So replacing them now will prevent initial problems in the future with the second boiler. The scope of the work for this project really includes installation of two new efficient condensing boilers, reconnecting some gas lines, and setup and verification that they are performing appropriately. The total cost for the boilers is $295,772. The purchase to Warwick will be made using the annual contract number 19-13739. The superintendent recommends the school board review the project information and be prepared to approve the Stonehouse Elementary boiler replacement and associated budget transfer at the October 17, 2023 meeting.
If I could just add that the James City County and the City of Williamsburg have approved the use of unspent capital improvement project funds from a former project for this particular issue.
So that's the transfer.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Ms. Ortego, and then I think Ms. Hummel. Yep.
Is this within the expected lifespan of this boiler?
Now, the lifespan of boilers is about 20 years. So from 2000, it's way past the 20
That's the
years.
one that's
yeah,
broken?
and the one that's
Okay,
and the
so-
one from 2026 will be in 2 years. So we replace both now to prevent that from happening.
Ms. Hummel?
My question.
Ms. Hummel first, and then.
My question concerns the useful life of the new boilers. Are we looking at 20 years again, or?
Yeah, the useful life for the boilers is 20 years. Now, the scheduled HVAC replacement for the Stonehouse HVAC is in FY '26. It's in the capital improvement plan currently for FY '26. But waiting that far in advance now to replace one boiler when both really should be replaced.
Okay, because the 2026 one is actually 3 years short
Right.
of its 20-year.
Well, it's actually 6 years past because Stonehouse was built in 2000. Yeah, the HVAC, the entire HVAC was scheduled
So
to be
they
replaced
put it
20
in
years. The 2026,
2006?
the 2006 boiler went bad. The boiler went bad in 2006, one of them, and it was replaced.
Okay.
So that boiler has a 20-year lifespan, which will be 2026, but we're replacing it early
Right.
as the scheduled replacement for the entire HVAC is in '26. You replace it now to prevent any further issues because we feel like it's be more efficient to do both because we need both to operate effectively. Am I explaining it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to vote to approve this, but it's the fact that the one that it's 2026.
Right.
And it was installed in 2006.
Correct.
And that's not the one that's broken.
No, ma'am.
So that's not broken, but you're gonna install them both at the same time?
Yes.
So that then in the future, they're
The
gonna
same
be
cycle.
in sync, because the
Correct.
reason they're not in sync is because something went wrong 6 years after
After.
for that one?
Correct.
Okay.
Placing your headlights, right?
Correct.
Don't just do the one.
Just do one, do both.
I think there's always some savings when there's a significant amount of work to do both together. There is some savings in joining the two projects together, Mr. Snipes, I presume.
Yes, you're correct.
Dr. Beers?
I'm just curious about the exclusions. Is that primarily boilerplate, or is it because we do that? You do that yourself, or
You said
I'm just
you
curious
said the
about-
exclusions.
Where-
What do you mean by that, Dr. Beers?
It's right below the pricing in term per JCC contract. So exclusions, any work not listed above, and then it's a whole series of things like engineering not included.
I'm sorry.
Are you looking on the
Yeah,
proposal
that's
itself?
I'm looking at the Warwick Mechanical Group. I guess their proposal.
Looking at the proposal?
You're looking at the proposal. Okay.
And I'm wondering, some of the things I looked at, are we gonna replace an expansion tank? It's not included. I'm just curious about that, whether, and that's what I mean. Maybe it's just boilerplate and it's what typically contractors put in?
I get, I'm trying to understand your question. Your question, are we replacing the product in kind?
Just if, it's more a case, and we don't have to do this tonight, but to look through those exclusions. And, I'm just curious, first of all, why they're included. And do we have to deal with any of those ourselves?
Now I see what you're talking about, the exclusion. So it's advising us that overtime work and weekend work is not included in that price.
Right.
It's advising us that the fire suppression was not going to be included in that. Those things are already going to be handled. We're already doing those things with our staff.
Okay, that's,
Right.
I got it.
Right.
Then that explains that. Why they're in there. Okay.
Go ahead, Dr. Beers.
Is there a warranty on these guys?
Yes, there is a warranty.
How long is the warranty?
I can get that for you, but usually warranties are about 10 years, 10 to 12 years on them, but the expected useful life is about 20.
Okay.
Would you see that in that SBQ?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Snipes. I appreciate it. I think we'll look forward to approving this in our next meeting. All right, move on to our information discussion items. Item 6.1, the FY25 10-year capital improvement plan committee recommendations. These are not necessarily Dr. Herron's recommended CIP for the 10-year, but do come from the committee. Dr. Herron?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Snipes is going to bring those committee recommendations to us this evening, and if I could just preface it by saying that when the committee makes the recommendations, they don't have right now the enrollment projections for the next 10 years. Those are in process right now, but we will have those numbers before I present my final proposed CIP to the board. So some of this is made, some of the recommendations are made for the timing of projects without future projections for enrollment. Mr. Snipes, you want to take it away?
Yes.
Thank you.
Again, good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board, and Dr. Herron. This evening, details of projects will be presented incrementally. Tonight's presentation will focus on the committee's recommendations and provide a preliminary look at the reasons and needs for those projects. The administration will continue to evaluate and fine-tune projects, alignment of the projects, and costs will be shared as part of the superintendent's proposed capital improvement plan in November. It's important to note that while we continue to be good stewards of taxpayer money, we must plan for necessary repairs and improvements to facilities. Neglecting our buildings and failure to plan for the future could result in emergency costs or larger investments in the long run. The information presented tonight represents that of a working document that will evolve until the school board's approval in December and possibly even until the final adoption in May. Included at your seat, I'm sure you have these not at your seat, but on your screens is a copy of the plan. Yeah, well, not the IT guy, though. I was going to look to the left. I was going to look to the IT guy for that one. The process began this spring to ensure adequate time prior to the operating budget development and to focus on the capital improvement plan. Principals were asked to submit requests for facilities improvements in the spring, and operations was asked to provide information on division-wide projects and routine maintenance schedules as well. The committee then reviewed and evaluated their requests to determine whether projects met the criteria to go forward as a capital improvement project. We invited, again, principals, 3 community members, the supervisor of facilities and capital projects, the director of finance, the senior director for operations, the chief financial officer, and our deputy superintendent. We want to thank Brian Sorrell, Christy Simon, Mike Hurley, April Melton, who is the JCC Parks and Rec Operations Manager, as well as a parent, Randy Casey Rutland from Town Management, Van Dobson, who is the retired Chief Facilities Officers at William & Mary, of course, Mr. Jim Falzone, Kelsey Bowen, Renee Ewing, and Mr. Keeper. The committee met on 3 separate occasions, twice in August and once in September. Information provided to the committee included enrollment projections as compared to building capacities. This information was from a year ago, as updated enrollment projections were not available until later this month. Project requests were also received from schools were also evaluated. The current school adopted capital improvement plan for fiscal years 2024 through 2033, as well as our most recent facility condition assessment and rankings. The estimates for the projects in the capital improvement plan included a 10% for A&E, 5% for contingency, and an annual escalation rate of 6% per annum. A new project may appear in the CIP for the first time due to new or updated information, say, for example, a new state requirement or mandates, or even for safety reasons. As funding is appropriated annually, tonight our initial focus is on fiscal year 25. We will review the changes for fiscal year 25 from the adopted fiscal year 24 5-year plan, and we will also review modifications to the current plan that may have arisen from the need or changes in estimates. We enhanced the process for the schools requesting facility improvement requests a few years ago. Any items that did not meet the threshold are being considered and completed in an operation and maintenance budget, and determined not needed at this time. As a reminder, our refurbishment cycles are listed for you. Paint and carpet is 10 years, fire panels are 12, refurbishments are 20 years, so on and so on. Last year, we added in stormwater repairs for every 75 years after a study was done by the James City County on our stormwater. The proposed fiscal year 25 projects are listed on the screen. Herb Blayton, repaint interior and replace carpeting. Laurel Lane, we're adding a walk-in freezer as well as replacing the pitched asphalt roofs. Matthew Whaley, we're replacing the HVAC system. At Norwich, a walk-in freezer. At Berkeley, a partial roof replacement over the kitchen and the cafeteria, orchestra, and music area. At Hornsby, we're repainting the interior and replacing carpet. At Cooley Field, we are requesting to install field turf. And for the division, we'll continue to perform maintenance on parking lots, playground equipment, as well as school bus replacements, storm drain repairs, and safety and security equipment. The committee proposed some changes this year, and again, I want to thank the committee because we had robust discussions on 3 occasions. One of those recommendations was to move the Stonehouse HVAC from FY26 to FY28. And the reason that was requested was because our maintenance team felt that they could still manage that well. However, at Matoka, the system continues to give us issues yearly, and they wanted to move that one up. They felt like they could maintain Stonehouse for two more years past the FY26 date. There also was a recommendation to include a fuel tank replacement at the Ops Central storage construction in FY27. Currently, our fuel tank is over 30 years old. If some of you, Dr. Beers, may remember, operation was built in about 1990, and so it's past time for those fuel tanks to be replaced. Mosley came to us a few years ago to talk about staffing and where to place staff, and at that time they recommended operations have a total shift in where buses exit and enter. Part of that was moving the fuel location, so we will include replacing that fuel tank at that time. So that's what the recommendation was, to add a fuel tank replacement to the Operations Central Storage construction in FY27.
As a part of,
we were going to add a central storage.
Yeah.
And the committee has said, while adding that storage, because they were going to have to reconfigure the lot, go ahead and replace the fuel tank at that time as well.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
In the facility condition assessment, they recommended some LED lighting upgrades in the CIP, and we're recommending that we do that in years 6 through 10. Right now, the current CIP is for 5 years. We're recommending adding that out into one of those 6 through the 10th years, which we will discuss at our next meeting. But so the LED lighting upgrades. So right now, most of our schools are in T12s or maybe even in T8s. But they recommended, facility condition assessment said, upgrade your lighting. So that's one of the things that the committee recommended. At Hornsby, there is an observation deck that was built there that goes out into what they call the BMP, which is a best management practice, just one of those ponds out there. And there was an observation deck that Hornsby was using for experiments. Well, that deck is now in need of repair, and the committee said, yes, repair it, but not within the 5-year CIP, further out into that 6-year, 6 through 10 years. And of course, because we had previous information about the enrollment, the committee recommended including a 10th elementary school in FY '27 and '28.
Ask a question on that slide. The observation deck, can you share the rationale if it needs to be repaired? Why wait so many years? Is it a safety matter now?
It's not a safety matter now because it's off. No students are out on it. The committee felt that the estimate as well as the necessity to get it done for an educational purposes could wait. There are things that are we going to spend the money for a deck repair, or is it more important to spend the money somewhere else? And so Jessica Ellison came on, which is our principal at Hornsby, as well as Christy Simon, who was a middle school principal, and we had that discussion. So.
Are we, it might be coming later, are we going to see costs associated with these choices? Because it's hard to see, like, what, you know, what kind of numbers are we talking about?
Yeah, basically, when I take the committee's recommendations and when bring my full proposal, it'll have everything on a spreadsheet, cost of every project. Some of the years on this may move depending on the new enrollment figures, but you'll have all of the detailed information at that time. This is basically the committee saying this is what we believe should be done in what year and what's most should be prioritized.
Hang on one second, Ms. Young, Ms. Hunley.
Yeah, so this is probably a silly question, but in the meantime, we monitor, like when it says we're going to put it out 26, 28, but somebody's looking in case something is going to break down so that we'd say, oh yeah, we had that 20, but no, it's not going to fly. We need to do it now.
And
So
that's
I just wanna make
one of
sure.
the reasons why they recommended moving Matoka up
Okay.
and Stonehouse back, because when
Okay.
they look at maintenance work orders and the issues that
Okay.
it had been causing, we wanted to get that moved a little faster.
Okay.
One more, Ms. Young. Did you have a comment or a question?
Yeah, I just had a question about the Hornsby observation deck repair. So from what I'm hearing is it's recommended that we move that back a year. Is that right?
It's recommended that we add it into the CIP, but it was not recommended that we replace it within the first 5 years. One of the things that we can always consider is if it's in the CIP, and just as we have done with the Stonehouse boilers, if money is available and we decide to do that sooner, if it's in the CIP, then the administration can make a decision to repair that sooner than in FY '29 or '30 or somewhere around there.
So it's not
Okay.
Mrs. Young.
I'm sorry.
So, Mr. Young, so it's currently not in the CIP, and generally how we've tried to approach new projects, unless it's an emergency and something is absolutely essential for operations, we tend to put them in the outer 5 years and allow them to come into the normal CIP so that we can prepare and our funding partners are aware of what's coming down the line. This has not been in the CIP for repair before. It was a recommendation by the principal, and therefore it's under consideration for this year to come into the 10-year plan and then move into the 5-year funded plan.
I'm trying to understand. It says that it's using the word repair, but if it needs repair, we're not talking replacement, but where is the observation deck at Hornsby? I'm not familiar where that is located.
There is a retention pond that is out near the fields, and the retention pond has a deck that goes out into a deck that goes out into it, and students would go out there to do science experiments. Well, they aren't doing that currently, haven't been doing it for at least a couple of years because the deck was in need of repair. I can get you an aerial on that from the meeting, that show you in an SBQ if you like.
No, I'm just, I mean, if it was being used for educational purposes and now we're not using it, okay, it just seems like we're out of sync with it. Because if it was useful to be used for science, then now it's not going to be available.
It hasn't been available for a few years, and as was discussed with the committee, there are other schools, Toano, Berkeley, and Blayton, James Blair, don't have an observation pond, and Hornsby has been doing it similarly as they have without it. So that's why it didn't rise to the need to come in as an emergency for an educational purposes. And Mr. Keever may be able to add a little more light to that situation. He was also in these discussions.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Right. Ms. Hummel?
Just a follow-up question to that. If something is not being used, it's like a deck that's not being used, and then we're putting it in a plan for maybe 6 or 7 years from now, is there any possibility that this could be a danger to have a deck over a retention pond that is not being used? I mean, is it something that, how are the students prevented from using it?
The students have been prevented from using it because we have a fence around it.
Fence,
that keeps them from using the deck.
Okay, thanks.
We'll let you continue, Mr. Snipes. Thank you.
Actually, Ms. Ewing would.
Thank you, Mr. Snipes. The preliminary estimated total of the committee's
Microphone.
recommendation. Sorry, thank you. The preliminary estimated total of the committee's recommendations for the proposed 5-year plan totals approximately $138.6 million. Some of the major projects included in the 5-year plan include the replacement of the roof of the Berkeley Gym and Auditorium in fiscal '25, replacement of the Matthew Whaley HVAC in fiscal '25, construction of a bus canopy at Claribird Baker in fiscal '26, and replacement of HVAC systems at Matoka and Stonehouse in fiscals '26 and '28. And the operations centralized storage, which includes the replacement of the underground transportation fuel tanks in fiscal '27. Next steps in the process include an opportunity for public comments on October 17th, followed by the presentation of the superintendent's proposed CIP on November 14th. And with that, we'd be happy to answer any additional questions you may have.
To assume that FY '28 would include the elementary school, that's why it's so much more?
Yes, ma'am. As previously mentioned, the committee recommended putting that school back in fiscals '27 and '28. Again, that's based on last year's enrollment projections. And so as we receive current year projections, that information could likely change in the superintendent's proposed.
Any others? Again, this is just kind of a first glance at the committee's work and their recommendations. We'll get a better understanding of what we might be asked to consider in our next meeting. You good, Ms. Young?
Yes, I'm with you. I'm still just thinking about Hornsby. I'm sorry. I'm off on my tangent. But thank you.
We'll move on to item 6.2, Dr. Herron, Standards of Accreditation, Academic Progress.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This evening we're going to bring you a very detailed review of the accreditation process and progress in standards of learning outcomes for this year. Dr. Worley and Mr. Walker will be leading the presentation this evening. Thank you.
Good. Ms. Alar, just a moment there to get the handouts. We'll go ahead. Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board, and Dr. Herron. Today's presentation will provide an overview of academic achievement, accreditation, and WJCC student performance on the state assessments. Data from the 18-19, 21-22, and 22-23 school years will be displayed. These 3 school years are used by the state in the calculation of our school state accreditation status. As a reminder, due to the closure of schools in March 2020, data for the 1920 school year are not available, and data for the 2021 are not included in accreditation calculations. This graph on the slide shows pass rate percentages for the 2023 state assessments. WJCC is the green bar being compared to the state pass rate in blue. The pass rates represent raw data. Simply stated, this means the percentage of pass proficient tests, which includes first-time test takers and retakes. You will notice a red line marking the established 75% state benchmark for English reading and writing and the 70% benchmark for mathematics, science, and history. As a division, we outperformed the state in all 5 tested areas. Additionally, you will see on the slide reference to the school quality profile in yellow at the bottom. This VDOE webpage is accessible to the public and serves as the data resource for assessment performance and school accreditation.
The next graph shows WJCC K-12 assessment data for the 3 years used in the calculations for state accreditation. Reading the graph from left to right, the green bar represents 18-19 data, which is pre-pandemic. The blue bar represents data for 21-22, and the purple bar represents 22-23 data. The next several slides will report data in that format. Our 2023 division pass rate results are English reading at 77%, English writing at 70%, mathematics at 75%, science at 72%, and history and social science at 70%. WJCC remained constant at reading, and we showed improvement across the other 4 content areas of writing, math, science, and history. Although we have not completely returned to pre-pandemic levels, our staff is committed to embracing our forward momentum and continuing the work.
This 3-year graph shows the combined academic performance of our 9 elementary schools across content areas for grades 3 through 5 students. Again, the red line indicates the established state benchmark, and the purple bar is the 22-23 data, showing English reading at 72%, math 75%, science 69%, and history 78%. Although we did not meet the state benchmark for elementary English reading and science, overall WJCC elementary students outperformed the state pass rate in all 4 content areas in 2023. We celebrate the positive increases in math, science, and history, and we do recognize there's continued work needed in English reading and science to meet and then exceed the state benchmark. In reviewing the grade level data in reading, our grade 3 pass rates were lower than the grades 4 and 5, which by the way also mirrored the lower grade 3 reading pass rates across the entire state. As a reminder, starting back in 2018-19, the General Assembly and the Virginia Board of Education's approved accreditation system began recognizing student growth on the grades 3 through 8 English reading and mathematics SOL tests for those students not meeting the proficiency pass rate. The growth data is factored into the very final accreditation totals for each school. The student growth percentages have been added onto the raw data for English reading and math. So for example, looking on the left at the purple bar, English reading at elementary increased from 72% pass rate to 81%, with those 9 percentage points of student growth added onto the pass rate. Mathematics increased from 75% to 84%, with the 9 percentage points of student growth added onto the pass rate.
The next graph shows the combined academic performance of our 4 middle schools across content areas for grades 6 through 8, initial tests and retakes.
The English pass rate represents the combination of reading and writing data, and the English is at 72%, math is at 72%, science at 71%, and history at 82%. Although we did not meet the state benchmark for middle school English, overall, middle school students exceeded the state pass rates across all content areas in 2023. We celebrate the positive gains in history and recognize the opportunity for continued work in English to exceed this benchmark. The next slide shows the inclusion of growth, which again is factored into final school state accreditation ratings. Growth percentages have been added to the raw data from the previous slide for English and math. English increases from 72 to 75% with the addition of 3 percentage points, and math increases from 72 to 77% with the addition of 5 percentage points for growth. The next graph shows the combined academic performance of our high schools across content areas. The English pass rate again represents the combination of reading and writing. The overall pass rate for English is 83%, math at 81%, science at 77%, and history at 63%. Overall, we did exceed the state benchmark in red line in 3 of the 4 tested areas, and additionally, high school students met or exceeded the 2023 state average or pass rate in science, reading, writing, geometry, and algebra 2. Another important factor to remember is the change in diploma requirements at the state level now only requires students to earn 1 verified credit in social studies, 1 verified credit in science, and 1 in math. Therefore, we will see a significant drop in the total number of high school students taking SOL tests in these subject areas. For example, the social studies pass rate is mostly composed of 9th graders testing in 1 social studies content area.
This slide shows 6 years of spring PALS proficiency data for students in grades K through 2. PALS stands for the Phonological Awareness and Literacy Screening Tool, which is the state-approved screener for Virginia's Early Intervention Reading Initiative. Let's look at the graph on the very far left for 2016-17. 81% of students met the expected spring PALS proficiency benchmark. And then reading from left to right, you will see that the PALS data are not available for the 1920 school year due to school closures. And then proceeding to the very far right, we had 79% of students meeting the 2023 PALS Spring benchmark. It's exciting to see the significant growth of 15 percentage points over the last 2 years.
The next few slides, we will take a deeper look at how groups of students are performing on state assessments within our division. Specifically, we will peel back the layers of our data and see how students in the Black, Hispanic, economically disadvantaged, English learner, and students with disabilities reporting groups performed on the 2023 assessments. Looking at our reading SOL performance, as a reminder, the green bar on the left represents pre-pandemic performance, the middle blue bar represents 2022 pass rates, and the purple bar on the far right represents 2023 results. It is evident the pandemic has had an adverse effect on students in identified groups. You will notice a red line marking the 75% state benchmark expectation for reading. The short, darker line with the purple bar represents the 2023 state pass rate for each subgroup. For example, let's look at Hispanic performance. The purple bar shows a 63% pass rate for Williamsburg-James City County students compared to the state average of 59%, indicated by the short black line. Overall, Williamsburg-James City County performed at or above the state average within 3 of the 5 subgroup areas in reading. We are continuing our work to accelerate progress across all groups.
This slide shows 3 years of math performance for the 5 student groups. The red line at the 70% mark shows the state benchmark expectation for mathematics. That shorter dark line represents the 23 state pass rate for each of the student groups. So let's look on the far left of the graph denoting the math performance of our Black students. The purple bar shows a 54% pass rate, and the darker line shows the state pass rate, also at 54%. This next slide shows 3 years of science SOL performance for the 5 student groups. Again, the red line at the 70% mark shows the state benchmark expectation for science. That shorter dark line represents the 23 state pass rate for each of the 5 student groups. So let's look in the very middle of the graph denoting the science performance of our economically disadvantaged students. The purple bar shows a 52% pass rate, and the darker line crossing the bar shows the state pass rate at 51%. Overall, when comparing the 2023 purple bar to the 2022 middle blue bar, you will see positive gains in science for 3 out of the 5 student groups. And last, you can see that 4 out of the 5 WJCC student groups met or exceeded the state's science pass rate that's indicated by that shorter dark line. We provided the board with 2 large handouts at the very beginning as supplements to the presentation this evening. I'll hold up one. It's 2-sided. And we're going to talk about our like school divisions first. This is just for further reference, should you want it, but we'll pull out specific points in the next few slides. That first handout is a deeper dive into the data as compared to our 6 like or comparable school divisions. The handout provides comparison assessment data, which we will highlight in 3 academic areas impacting accreditation. These 6 school divisions are comparable to WJCC in student enrollment, number of schools, per pupil spending, operating expenditures, and most demographic groups. However, these 6 comparable like school divisions all have more schools, with less student enrollment in 4 of the 6 school divisions, and lower teacher-to-student ratios for 5 of the 6 school divisions. WJCC and the like school divisions are outlined on the map of Virginia for reference: Augusta, Bedford, Fauquier, Frederick, Rockingham, and Suffolk. You will see WJCC data on the far left in green, followed by the 6 like comparable school divisions in alpha order. This slide shows the all students performance pass rate in English reading, with WJCC outperforming all 6 like school divisions. The next slide shows that WJCC outperformed all 6 like school divisions in mathematics. And this final slide shows that WJCC outperformed all 6 like school divisions in science.
Now we will take a look at how Williamsburg, James City County performed in comparison to our local school divisions. Your second handout highlights supplemental data comparing WJCC to a few local school divisions. Our local comparisons are simply based on geographical proximity and are not necessarily aligned with our overall demographics. First slide shows reading performance in WJCC compared to local divisions. WJCC is represented in the green bar on the left, with reading performing ahead of 2 out of the 3 local school division comparisons. This slide shows math performance compared to local school divisions. Again, WJCC is represented in the green bar on the left, with math performing ahead of 2 of the 3 local school division comparisons. The last slide shows science performance, with WJCC again performing ahead of 2 of our 3 local school divisions. Now that we have seen how our students performed academically, let's take a look at how schools are currently accredited by the Virginia Department of Education accreditation system. It's noteworthy to tell you that the Virginia Board of Education is looking at new accreditation models for the future implementation. We will update you with this information about changes to the accreditation system as information becomes available. Virginia's current accreditation system incorporates accreditation ratings based on student performance on school quality indicators, which we will go into more detail about on the next few slides. Before looking at the actual accreditation indicators, it's important to know how the state measures each performance level. Basically, remember the statement, go green. Level 1 is the green color indicating performance is at or above the standard or showed improvement from level 2. Level 2 is the yellow color indicating performance is near the standard or showed improvement from level 3, and level 3 is the red color indicating performance is below the standard.
Virginia's current accreditation system incorporates accreditation ratings based on student performance across 6 school quality indicators for both elementary and middle schools. The 6 indicators are overall academic achievement for all students in English reading, math, and science, the overall gap group achievement in English reading and math, and then student engagement levels, which are determined by the levels of chronic absenteeism. The school quality profiles present information in a performance dashboard. Information about each school quality indicator helps schools and school divisions develop plans for continuous improvement for all schools on each indicator. And this is an example of an elementary or a middle school accreditation profile with the 6 indicators shown there on the screen. This next slide shows an example of a high school accreditation profile containing 9 indicators. The 3 additional areas for high schools include graduation and completion rate, dropout rate, and the overall CCCRI, known as the College Career and Civic Readiness Index, which is new this year. You've been provided one additional handout, a colored handout illustrating all 16 schools' accreditation rating and performance in each of their school quality indicators. This slide focuses on our 9 elementary schools. You will notice that all 9 elementary schools are at level 1 green for the all students' performance in English reading, which is that first column on the left, and also for math, which is the third column. 2 of our elementary schools are at level 1 green for all 6 school quality indicators, and 1 school has targeted work for science achievement. All 9 of our elementary schools are fully accredited.
The next slide focuses on the school quality indicators and accreditation ratings of our middle and high schools. All middle and high schools are at level 1 green for overall academic achievement in English, indicated in the first column, math in the third column, and science in the sixth column. Additionally, all high schools are at level 1 green for both the graduation and completion index and the dropout rate. All 3 high schools are at level 2 for our college, career, and civic readiness index. And you will note that we have some continued work to do to support the needs of students across certain groups to focus on closing gaps with our secondary schools. Finally, all high schools are fully accredited, and 3 of our 4 middle schools are fully accredited, with 1 accredited with conditions. As you saw on the previous slides on your handout, chronic absenteeism is an accreditation performance indicator for all schools. We have set high expectations for attendance in Williamsburg, James City County, and we're continuing to provide interventions at the elementary, middle, and high school levels to improve daily attendance. Let's take a look at chronic absenteeism for Williamsburg. This graph shows data across 3 years measuring chronic absenteeism rate for WJCC. Chronically absent means a student misses 10% or more of the days enrolled in school. This includes excused and unexcused absences. The left bar in each color group represents WJCC and the right represents the state. The number in each bar indicates the percentage of students chronically absent that school year. For the WJCC bars, you will also note the enrollment is provided for the given year. For example, if you look at the purple bars on the right of this graph, for the 2023 school year, 16.2% of our 11,308 enrolled students were chronically absent. Although we performed better than the state in 22 and 23, we have not reached our pre-pandemic attendance rates.
This slide shows the 22-23 chronic absenteeism rate of WJCC in comparison to our like comparable school divisions. The WJCC rate of 16.2% of students being chronically absent ranks fourth out of the 7 divisions and is lower than the state percentage rate of 19.5%, which is designated by the blue line. Next slide shows the 22-23 chronic absenteeism rate in comparison to 3 local school divisions. The WJCC rate of 16.2% of students chronically absent ranks third out of the 4 divisions and is lower again than the state percentage rate of 19.5%, which you see designated by the blue line.
The next slide compares attendance to achievement with state assessments. Overall, WJCC students completed over 20,000 tests last spring. Of those, almost 1,500 were passing scores. 1,500 were passing scores. And as you can see in this graph, student achievement is affected by student absenteeism at all 3 levels, elementary, middle, and high school. For example, let's look at the elementary schools in the green bars on the left side. 6,581 elementary level tests were administered, and students absent less than 10 days had a pass rate of 74%. Students with 10 plus absences had a 43% pass rate, and students with 18 plus absences who are considered chronically absent resulted in a 36% pass rate. The same trend applies to middle and high schools. Strong attendance is directly related to successful student outcomes, and we know that if a student attends school regularly, their opportunities for success dramatically change. We must have a continued focus on attendance, which we are doing now as we move through the school year. Moving forward, we will continue building on the momentum from last year. School leaders, teachers, and staff will continue to set high expectations for academics, behavior, and school attendance. Additionally, we will continue our focus on the delivery of high-quality first-time instruction that engages students in learning. Currently, our MTSS teams, our teacher leaders, and administrators support this work, and they will provide resources and promote initiatives for instruction and behavior intervention as needed. And our teachers will continue using data to drive our instructional decisions in collaboration with colleagues, on collaborative teacher teams, and in our PLC meetings. And finally, individual school data will drive the development of school improvement plans and frame our work and intervention across academic content areas. Specifically, schools are setting goals for gap group work and school improvement plans based on their student needs. School improvement plans will also include strategies that focus on writing across all content areas and student goal setting.
In closing, our goal for this evening was to share the SOL 2023 data, the Powell Spring data, to give you awareness of student achievement and to know that WJCC schools are moving forward with a positive momentum and a student-centered focus for the success of all students. So, Mr. Chair, that concludes our presentation for this evening, and we're ready to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you both for a very robust presentation and information. I want to open it up to the board for questions or comments. Ms. Hundley, you look like you have something on your mind.
Excellent report. I love seeing colors and the data. How do we communicate this to our people that aren't watching now, parents? I know we have the Engage newsletter. I know principals reach out. How do they get, other than saying, go to the school board meeting, pull it up on YouTube and see the presentation, how can we get this in our stakeholders' hands, our parents, and
Yep,
how is it
I think in our
communicated?
family newsletter, we do reference some of the highlights from each board meeting, and we provide a direct link in the family newsletter that will take parents straight to this. Plus, it's also available at the state. All of this information is in the quality profile at the state level as well. But we wanted to bring it in gory detail tonight so that you'll see where we are and where we're doing well and where we still have a lot of work to do.
Ms. Young?
Well, I mean, we talked about this at the last school board meeting about how chronic absenteeism was affecting academics. It's pretty shocking, I think, when you see students who miss more than 10 days aren't passing even at a 50% rate. One of the things, Dr. Herron, you mentioned is that there's, and I think that was Miss Huntley. Was that Miss Huntley that just asked that question?
Yes, ma'am.
Or Miss Hummel?
Mrs. Huntley.
One of the things I agree with is that parents need to be made more aware. You're talking about that on the newsletter, they can, that, you know, that there's a link. Maybe there needs to be a targeted article with those graphs and everything in on just maybe just on the part about on each of those areas that were in this presentation. For example, the ones on chronic absenteeism, there could be a little article that talked about how does chronic absenteeism affect your student passing tests or passing the SOLs. Because it seems like, and I've been a teacher and I've been on the school board now for almost 8 years. It seems like we keep, I feel like we're on this very slippery slope of trying to make things easier and more manageable for people, and I don't think it's working. I think we need to, part of this presentation, it says next steps is high expectations. Well, I think that's where we really need to focus also. Our expectations aren't high enough for our students. I'm really concerned about these grades, and I know that before the pandemic, things were, I think we were also concerned about academics, but not quite to this extent. But I'm very, very concerned about what this presentation presents because, and Dr. Beers and I know all of us who are very concerned about reading, if kids aren't reading by the end of third grade, no wonder our scores are so low. But I do appreciate the presentation, and I know how hard our staff is working. We've got to get kids to school, and I really would like us to consider maybe the school division does need to hire a truant officer, and I know that in some states around the country that parents are being taken to court if they don't bring their kids to school. And maybe we need to consider it. I know it's wonderful to try to help them meet their, meet the demands of parenthood, but maybe we need to raise their expectations a little bit too. I'm finished, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Young. Ms. Ortega?
Yeah, thank you for this presentation. It's definitely very comprehensive and transparent, but it's extremely concerning nonetheless. This is I'm not finding the words. It's very disappointing, and I do think it's something that we need to be concerned about and figure out what's going wrong. And just as one specific question, what happens with an individual student who does not pass the SOL? What happens after that when we find out, okay, this person didn't pass in one or all subjects, then what?
Well, for example, at the high school level, that would impact their progression towards graduation requirements.
So,
Graduation pass rate's been pretty high.
so at the high school level, where they're earning actual credits for their transcript for graduation, there's a certain amount of verified credits that they have to earn their diploma. So we have lots of mechanisms in place where they do retakes. Part of the information that we presented at the beginning, the raw data is it's representing the initial test take and then the retakes that we're eligible to do, and then seniors that are at risk. Sometimes they might test 3 or 4 times, but what we do for them is several intervention opportunities. There's different remediation opportunities. Teachers go back and reteach. Sometimes students are in credit recovery. At the middle school level, we have opportunities for retakes for certain score bands, but we also take that data to set up intervention classes the following year to provide, some students are enrolled in that during a certain portion of the day, but teachers take the data to inform their instruction.
And the same applies at elementary school. There are opportunities for retakes within those certain score bands, but then schools are taking all of the data. It's just not one assessment result that would determine a child's future success with that, but looking at multiple data points and then setting up interventions, accelerations, and so forth for the next school year.
So, but are we saying, and maybe I'm reading this wrong, are we saying that in math SOLs, in our subgroups, that nearly half of all black students are not passing math SOLs for the entire division?
Whatever that number was, 54, that's the pass rate for the black students.
So
yes, that's correct.
Is that what that means? That's one and the same, the way I just said it also?
I think the impact of the pandemic on some of our students was greater than others, and that is still showing up. If you look at some of the outcomes pre-pandemic, we were beginning to make some inroads, but we have a huge focus in every school, in every gap group, obviously last year and this year. I mean, if I look at third grade outcomes, disappointing, yes, but all of those students had 2 years with an interrupted education. If I look at the PALS data, where we've been focused in on the science of reading and new focus completely on literacy, that data has increased from 62 to 79. So that should impact third grade scores next year because we've made some ground with K through 2 in the last 2 years. But there's still an incredible amount of work to be done. We recognize that and we agree with you.
Dr. Beers?
It's,
Go ahead, Dr. Beers.
I didn't know if Ms. Young was going to come in there. Was that you?
We can't see you.
Oh,
We can't hear you. I'm sorry.
no, Mr. Chair, I would like to comment after, when everybody else is through.
All right, we'll come back to you, Ms. Young. Dr. Beers?
I'm encouraged by these results. I think the state has come up with an overly elaborate system, but what I do see is, and I think it's encouraging, is the growth may not be as great as we would like it to be. But I think that we all have to remember, an awful lot of these students were at a year and a half. It took them quite a while to get back into the flow, and they were met with a brand new assessment system. So I'm encouraged, and I think the division ought to be encouraged that we are seeing some growth. I think the other thing to keep in mind, even though we may not be as high as some of the other divisions, we always have to come back to, and I've said this before, statistically, how significant is the difference between a 72 and a 71, or a 74 and a 73? And I know it looks like, well, we're above or we're low because, there are 2 points. But the actual difference may not be that significant. And I think that's important to point out. I am, as you might gather, I am disappointed at the writing scores. I think one of the challenges is in the way the state has set this up. Most of the two critical communication areas, oral and written, I don't see them getting nearly as much attention as reading and reading. It's not that reading is not important; it is important. But learning how and knowing how to communicate and demonstrating it and being assessed on it, whether it's writing, whether it's talking, speaking, whatever it might be, these are critical skills. And and it's not just us; it's really across the nation. It's like reading sort of runs everything. But that's I don't want to say it's a passive because I don't believe it is a passive activity. But the other communication skills are really important. And if writing isn't up there with reading, it needs to be up there. It's one of the ways kids learn to become better readers is through their own writing and the whole process of authoring and putting your ideas down, and the notion that fuzzy thinking is going to lead to fuzzy writing is really important to recognize. But having said that, I think overall we're going in a positive direction, and I anticipate that we will continue to see modest growth each year. We're not going to see leaps and bounds over tall buildings with this. It's always a long process, that even. So I'm still encouraged, and I wanted to make sure you heard that.
Thank you, Dr. Beers. Before we go back to Ms. Young, Ms. Hummel.
Thank you. So, thank you for all the clarity and the transparency and all the hard work putting this together. I guess my concern, along with some of the other school board members' concerns, I was expecting that there would be growth between 2021, 22 and 2022, 23. Like, I was expecting that 2023 would be higher than 2022, and in some cases, like in particular the middle school academic performance in English and math, and then the high school, that's on page, well, I don't know what page it's on, and then the high school one as well, where you had 2021, 2022, English was 92 for academic performance, and then it went down for 2022, 2023. And so I think that is, I'm wondering, and I guess my question to you guys is, what is your takeaway for that? Like, how do you, I mean, I know we're coming out of COVID, we're coming back, and so I guess I was expecting to see like steady growth, not a growth in one year and then going backwards. So what is the takeaway for that?
So several things that we see and we've discussed. One being specifically with middle school, when you dig deeper into the data by school level, we had a couple of challenges last year. One school had a huge turnover in English teachers and a lot of long-term subs. There was another school that did not have a reading specialist who moved in the middle of the year. It was hard to fill that position. And I'll look to my colleague, I would say this incorrectly, but I know from one year to the next, when you look at how they calculated growth, that was also a little different this year, which it was a little harder, so we expected to see that. And then when you look at, you had a question about high school as well, I think.
Yeah, it was the like English English and math scores.
So when you look at the English comparison, some of the things that you all have been mentioning, it's a combination of reading and writing. The majority of it's reading, but when you look at it also, so the kids that are taking the reading test in high school, they entered high school this year, was one of the things we noted in 2020, which really they didn't have a full year of school until the second year. And again, the calculation was a little different, but when you peel back, if you look at it each level, it's points, but there's still a lot of work to do. So, and I think that's why we have a strong, not I think, I know that's why we're really focused in on our school improvement plans this year with laying out where each gap group number was and what content area. And we're really specific at talking about how is writing not just being an English class, because it's something that has to be incorporated in all that we do. How do we write about PE? How do we write about, art? How do we write about science? And we're being pretty strategic about that work this year and connecting with our school improvement plans.
Thanks. And then just one other question. When I look at the accreditation chart, it's very clear that the schools that have the lower amount of our subgroups are the ones that are all in green. And I mean, that's not a surprise to anyone because of the way we do our redistricting or our zoning or whatever. And we know we have some schools that are a lot needier than other schools. So what is the division's plans for, I guess, recognizing the impact that all the subgroups have on the schools that have a lot more yellow than the schools that are all green?
I think we're looking from curriculum and instruction to really put their support where it's most needed this year and starting to look at how we're deploying those resources to help the schools as well. James River, for example, and CPB were both down in science last year, and CPB came up and was able to actually be top of the elementary schools in science. James River had one teacher who underperformed, and that dropped their scores back into the red band again. It all comes down, unfortunately, some ways for good teachers, to the individual teacher level. And so just monitoring that closely as we move into next year is going to be very important as well, that we don't have individual or groups turnover in teachers that we're not coming in behind to support at a greater level. I mean, James Blair has one in red again, but they improved across the board dramatically this year as a school, and they came out of federal improvement in with English language learners as well. So there was a huge amount of celebration there, even though they still have a red on their card. So there's been a slow piece of improvement. Where there's drops, it's happened statewide. And as I think Kathy or Sean just alluded to, the calculation of growth was actually changed again this year. So the data this year is not the same as last year. So it's hard to make a direct comparison. I think the best comparison we could make was to take every system that looks like us across the board and say, how did we do in comparison to those other systems? And that's where we looked at our peer districts in terms of demographics, number of students, financial support, and everything else. And we were top in everything with our peer groups, but we don't want to make excuses. We just know we've got work to do.
And then, so we have accredited with conditions for James Blair because they had, last year, they had how many level 3s? And then you said now they've got just one. So having one level 3 does not make you accredited with conditions. Is that correct?
So that's a tricky question.
Yes.
For instance, when you look at James River Elementary, they have one red in science, but they are fully accredited. They are not accredited with conditions.
Okay.
And that's because they have been previously accredited for 3 consecutive years prior.
Okay.
So therefore, they qualify for a 2015 approved waiver by the General Assembly.
Okay. And James Blair was new.
It doesn't have
They have
that.
3 years worth of data being
Got it.
consistently accredited, so they're
I got
in a
it.
sense
I remember
protected
that.
for a year.
So,
Is that the
Jim,
same with Tawana?
James Blair didn't have 3 years of data.
actually, that's not the same as Toronto. They dipped significantly by 5 points in one area. And Dr. Worley's referenced already the turnover in teachers within one department, which potentially was at the heart of that. But, you know, there's obviously a huge focus in that school to bring it back to where it was. That was a disappointing outcome.
They also had access to the 3 years of data, 3 years of calculation, so it was why they're still fully accredited. And I think, you know, we talked about last year with the one middle school, working with Blair, and even Dr. Heron went to the state to advocate for that we did not have access to the same resources to calculate our accreditation as other middle schools had. And once you earn that accreditation, that's what you're working with to come out of it. We have to do certain steps to get through that.
Yeah.
Good, Ms. Hummel?
Yeah, so just having one level 3 does not make you be accredited with conditions, is that
Not necessarily, because they've used a 3-year average.
So we just have to put particular attention on Toano and James River and keep attention on James Blair
Correct.
to make sure that,
Yeah. So the level, when James Blair was going through school improvement last year and James River and CBB and science, there was a huge amount of extra work involved. And so that same amount of work we will bring internally to where we need it. Without any state oversight, we will immediately focus our efforts in where we need to put them in terms of extra resources and help.
because if we don't,
Right.
Everything that's a yellow, we're looking at too, but more particularly red, and our goal is to go green.
Hang with me, Miss Young. I'm going to go to Miss Donner first.
Thank you for.
That's fine. I'm waiting.
Thank you. This is really thorough and appreciate all the hard work that goes into it. One of the questions we get as board members is what can the community do to help support, particularly in areas like Ms. Ortico pointed out, where we've got Black and students at almost at 50% and our English language learners.
I think one of the things that's been brought at the state level for elementary and middle school is the resources that we've just been provided by the VDOE General Assembly for tutoring, for literacy, and we're right now working through what that's going to look like for us. Again, one of our greatest barriers is transportation in providing an after-school or before-school program, so we're trying to figure out exactly how that works. I know as part of that, there is a new tutoring resource that we have not seen yet, but we're hoping to get information on, which may be robust enough to allow community members to come in and partner with us in helping students as well. But very complex for us to work through and get a plan that's going to work because of our transportation challenges. But we're in the middle of that right now.
Let me go back to Miss Young and then Miss Ortigo. Miss Young?
Okay, one of the things I was just looking at the subgroup part of the presentation again. We've talked about chronic absenteeism. I'm wondering how affected these scores are by chronic absenteeism in this group. Do we have any data that talks about these groups and how many days of school these groups, you know, I know it's not all students in those groups. But and I know that last year many of the schools were tracking students and finding, you know, which students and which groups of students were chronically absent. Are we doing that again this year?
Absolutely. We have a full-blown plan for absenteeism, meeting with parents, following up with students, letters about absences. Everything we did last year, we've started off this year again, and already students are not at school who need to be there. We don't break that number down by subgroups right now because we follow up on every individual student who's not at school.
Well, I mean, one of the things that I think there might be a correlation between absenteeism and those scores. That's one thing. The second thing that I remember last year when this board, when we were talking about the student handbook, we were talking about cell phone usage. And I'm wondering, I mean, and I know there was some opposition from high school teachers, but I'm very concerned about the impact that social media and is having on our middle school and high school students, and even some of our elementary students. I mean, there's no place that I go, and I can literally say no place that I go where people aren't glued to their phones. And I think a lot of our students are missing out on education because what's happening on their phone is of more value to them than what is happening in the classroom. And again, I'm going to encourage this board. Unfortunately, several of us won't be on here, but the cell phone usage, I think, is a critical issue for us as a school division and how it's impacting our students. If we want kids to learn about history or science, then that has to be more important than what's happening with Beyonce or Taylor Swift. And I don't see that happening, and I'm very concerned from what I've spoken with some substitute teachers about how even getting the attention of a classroom, because it takes them so long to have the students put their phones away, and how that is impacting learning. And that is definitely going to impact our test scores. And maybe I'm the only one that is still concerned about cell phone use, but I have a feeling that unless, as a school division, we grapple with this issue and make some very hard decisions about cell phones in our schools, this is going to continue. On the other hand, I do want to thank, I know our teachers are working very, very hard to make changes. It's very hard to teach a student. I mean, when I was a teacher and a kid didn't come to school because they were sick, or you had several that didn't come back, you're always playing catch up with those kids. But I feel like the school division is playing catch up with a large group of kids, and that's almost insurmountable. But I know that the school division and our teachers are working very hard. So I feel like Ms. Donner talked about how we can involve the community on this issue, and I think that's another area that we've got to focus on, is getting our families to understand the impact that this is having upon their students' learning, but more importantly, their students' future. I mean, if we want kids to have a future, we have to believe that education is important and that it takes you places that you wouldn't be able to go otherwise. And that concludes my comments. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Young. Ms. Ortega?
See, I just wanted to understand, back to the accreditation thing, I just wanted to understand, how then, what is the scenario in which a school that's not Blair would lose accreditation or become accredited with conditions? Because they're exempt because of 3 years, they're exempt this year, so would it be three consecutive years of having a red? That would help me understand what would make us slip down.
So let's take, for example, James River Elementary. They've been previously fully accredited for the last 3 years.
Right.
So therefore, this year, when they had the one red,
Right.
they remained fully accredited, not with conditions. Right. But next year,
right,
if it doesn't change based on the spring test results with science in 2024, then we'll have a problem with accredited with conditions.
Okay, because
they're no longer protected.
Because technically this year, though, we're still accredited. So
Correct.
Next year, looking back, it's still going to have 3 consecutive years of accreditation.
But it has 1 year lower, so the cumulative 3 year scores will not get them above the mark.
Scores, not just looking at.
Yeah, so you're taking an average of 3 years.
Of numbers, not
Yes.
just accredited or not.
Correct. Correct. It's the actual numbers of students passing.
Okay. And then I wanted to clarify, if I understood something correctly. Dr. Heron, you said at James River, there was a situation, and I don't know if it's this red or not, but that there was one teacher who was underperforming, and that dropped something?
Yeah, I think the scores dropped because of underperformance in the classroom.
One individual? Is that why the red is there?
No, basically the scores overall, Sean, Mr. Walker, you can explain the scores better than I can in terms of how we end up with the red.
So
But the overall, the grade level dropped overall.
let's just say, as an example, you had 3 classrooms of 25 students on a grade level taking the grade 5 science test. 2 classrooms did pretty well, and the other classroom did very poorly. It would definitely impact, when you think about the performance of those 75 students. And one classroom doing very poorly would definitely impact it.
So what happens then?
We can talk about that in a different venue, potentially.
Any other comments or questions? For my part, I do, and it's been said by my colleagues, do appreciate the transparent data and the look in that this provides us. And clearly, there's a lot of ground to still make up as we want to proceed beyond the academic achievement levels that we were enjoying before the shutdown. And there's a lot to parse out and say we can fix this, we need to address that first. I think for my part, as I look at it, and kind of as a response to the feelings about the attendance policies and procedures, and that it was heavily punitive. I think that, of course, that had not been the intention, the motive behind the 18 or the, 50% per, the days absent, was it 50%?
It's 9 days per marking period, 18 total, in terms of the grade reduction potentially in a credit course.
Thank you, sir. Certainly not meant to be punitive, but as a effort to remind families, community, that it's critically important that students are in the classroom and engaged in the learning process. And when we look at the data that we receive here, following the information that we've been provided, we lag behind York County in English, math, and science and academic performance. And then at the same time, they are exceeding our attendance record for the same study period. I think the proof is in pudding there. And to piggyback on what Ms. Young suggests, not only that they are in the class, but that they're present, that they're engaged in the learning experience. I think that's also a twofold pieces of the larger puzzle when it comes to addressing student achievement. And there are a lot of other factors and things that I know that the division is going to be addressing. But I do hope, I appreciate, let me first say, I appreciate the direction that this division has taken with curbing chronic absenteeism, holding families accountable and responsible for having their students in the classroom. We see the evidence right before us here, and I hope that our families and our community members see it as well and see it for what it is, that families need to be engaged in this and getting their students to class. And again, with Ms. Hundley's questions early on, how do we message this? How do we get it to our families as partners in curbing the deficit?
Yeah.
So,
Mr. Chair, if I may say, we certainly will take note of the comments on that tonight and re-communicate about absenteeism and put some of the figures out there that we presented tonight in terms of, if you have this number of absences, this is the percentage of students who are failing, who are not in school, and start to put those numbers out more publicly so the parents realise it's really, really important. And we'll certainly regroup and re-emphasize again the cell phone policy.
Can I ask one more?
Yes, ma'am. I was about to ask if anybody else had final questions.
So
or
it
comments.
relates to Ms. Young's question about the subgroups. For example, the subgroup performance for English as a second language, for instance. If you look at the English as a second language students who were not chronically absent, how are their test scores compared to the ones that were chronically absent? The same for the black subgroup. Because if there is some kind of a correlation, you can look at the correlation and go, okay, I'd be interested in knowing if the 54% that passed, if 80% of, or the ones that passed were
Always there.
always there and always attending, and so that it doesn't really have to do with your race. It has to do with whether you're chronically absent, perhaps, or whether you're ESL or not. So it kind of lets us suss out some of the attention that we need.
Absolutely. And I think that we will certainly do that as a follow-up to try to, we're not identifying chronically absent students by race, but we certainly are, following up on every single student who's not at school. And I think when we look at, we're following up. But we do know that, for example, at James River, that some of the students who were absent last year, chronically absent last year, that were not successful, and I think we can do that in every single building.
Was there anyone else before we move on? Dr. Heron, when might we see the next update?
Probably mid-year, working, strategically in every single school. Every school plan is focused on the gap groups in that particular school. And so we'll have an update meeting with every single school, and probably even before then. Dr. Worley and Mr. Walker meet monthly, and they look at updates with the schools individually, and we'll certainly bring an update to the board to show you progress.
Can we ask perhaps for a sooner update on attendance?
Absolutely.
Okay. Great. All right, let's move on to item 7 on our agenda, looking at policies. We've got 12 to review this evening, and as always, just really appreciate Dr. Heron and her staff, and certainly our school board policy committee members, Ms. Hummel and Ms. Young, getting us to this point. Dr. Heron?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Keever's going to walk us through some of the policy discussions that came to the policy committee at the last meeting. Mr. Keever.
Thank you, Dr. Heron. Our first, Mr. Chair, do you want me to just start with 701 and?
Let's just push through. We'll take some pauses
Okay.
between and see if there are any questions.
Yes, sir.
As we've been doing. Thank you.
7.01 is LBD home instruction. You may recall that this policy came before the board in May. We made some revisions to this particular policy. I think in our work in taking the language from VSBA, there was a phrase around State Board of Education tests being approved by the State Board of Education that wasn't edited out as it needed to be. So we're bringing this policy back to you to incorporate that change. That's the only change that we're making. It's on line 29 through 31.
Ms. Ortega? Okay.
Our second policy this evening is IGBG, which talks about homebound instruction and alternative means of instruction. This particular policy was last revised in 2017. We have endeavored to align it more closely with our current practice in the VSBA model policy. On the policy overview page, it talks about some specific pieces that have been updated. I do want you to be aware that we have enhanced the regulation around this particular policy. So there's an IGBGR, and the language that was stricken both from 14 through 19 and 28 through 29 were included in the regulation.
That was actually going to be one of my questions, if there was a companion regulation. Due to the added language, courses approved in possible high school credit through virtual emergent technologies, would that be
Say that line for me one more time, Mr. Dow.
Last paragraph on the first page, for courses approved and offered for possible high school credit through virtual or other emerging technologies. Am I looking at the right thing?
You are.
Okay. So that's something that would be better explained, parsed out in a regulation, since we don't see what those might entail in the policy.
I'm not 100% certain that is included in the regulation, but I do believe that line itself is related to the idea of the VSBA model and the concept that we are providing opportunities for students to earn credits through a virtual model.
Okay. My curiosity was the emerging technologies and what parameters might be around what emerging might be.
We can look at that. I think that right now that's an online virtual model.
Okay, I'm good.
Okay.
Just curious. There is a regulation. Thank you.
The next policy is JHCC GBEC, which is related to communicable diseases. There's been a change in state code whereby nurse practitioner is stricken and advanced practice registered nurse is the language that we are asked to utilize. Ms. Ortega.
Is that just a different name for the same thing, or is that a different thing?
We believe that it is, we believe that terminology has changed to be advanced practice registered nurse.
So formerly known as nurse.
Correct.
Okay. I just.
What is the difference between a registered nurse and an advanced practice registered nurse?
I don't believe there is a difference. I believe there's a change in the nomenclature. So whereas at one point you might have been a library media specialist, you are now a librarian. I think sometimes titles and names change. VSBA updated their model policy with the revised language.
Okay, so that's where the advanced practice came from.
Correct. Based on the update to the legal reference as well.
So just, if a parent has a note for a sick child or for an absence, and it's from a nurse practitioner, is that going to be a problem?
I don't believe that's a problem. This is related to the communicable diseases policy itself.
All nurse practitioners are advanced practice registered nurses.
Correct. Thank you, Mrs. Hummel. Was that what you were going to say that, Ms.
Yes,
Monroe?
it's a more global term, and a nurse practitioner is one example of that.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Donner, did you have something? That was it too?
I was Googling.
You got it? Everybody's Googling.
Trying to help.
Awesome. Great.
That's those using those cell phones again.
I would have done that, but I'm engaged. I'm engaged in the meeting, so I didn't want to Google.
For educational purposes. Thank you.
Item 7.4.
Yes, sir. This policy, IIBD, school libraries and media centers, we brought to the board in July. There was a request from the board to go back to committee, and prior to going back to committee, to reconvene conversation with our librarians around the language of this particular policy. We are bringing forward for the board's consideration, based on the policy committee's work, a suggestion or suggested language from Ms. Donner. She submitted that to the committee for review, and we feel like that's the appropriate course of action.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. Next two, I believe, are from the G section, conditions for employment, which would be GCDA. There is a formatting update for consistency with some of our other policies. We've added some specific lines about if an employee was faced a criminal charge and or the notification that's necessary as a result of that particular criminal charge. GCLB is around our tuition assistance program. The language of this particular policy, as it's currently written, really belongs in a regulation. This policy has been amended to provide the superintendent with authorization to develop a regulation. The lines that are stricken have been incorporated into a regulation. In addition, the regulation has been reworked to provide more of an opportunity for employees to access the tuition assistance program by way of changing the number of semesters from 2 to 3. We have typically provided semester opportunities. A lot of college courses now are running through a third semester or summer, so we've tried to update this to make it more employee friendly with respect to the regulation.
So the policy then before redlined was more restrictive?
Correct.
Was there any discernible budgetary impact?
There's a certain line item that is in our budget for tuition assistance. We have typically not spent all of that and want to be able to continue to make it available to employees on a first come, first served basis.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Orgo, do you have anything?
I have.
I'm just reading your face.
I know. I do have a general question, but I will wait till the end of 7.
Okay. All right. FFA?
FFA, school names. This was last revised in 2016. The language was added to encourage selecting of school names for locations in the community versus a specific individual. The VSBA verbiage also included specific requirements around if an individual were selected to be for a school to be named after in terms of being deceased for at least 10 years. Further, we updated the regulation to code it and put it in line with the particular policy itself.
I like that policy for a lot of reasons. Okay. BBA, sir?
School board powers and duties. The next actual several are board policies. I'm happy to kind of speak to what the changes were in BBA. We're recommending the change from 10 to 7 days in terms of a public hearing notice. That is in alignment with the VSBA model. There is specific information in the VSBA model and I believe in state code that talks about specialized student support positions. So we've added that to the policy itself. The legal updates, the legal references were updated as well.
I was looking over this earlier today, and I'm trying to find that bullet point again. Yeah, it's the last bullet point on the second page. Shares that at any back-to-school night event in the division to which the parents of enrolled students are invited, any parent in attendance receives prominent notification of an access. Does that make sense? Prominent notification of an access in paper or electronic form.
It maybe should be of access to, probably of access, and maybe the and needs to come out as of access in paper or electronic form or both.
Okay. Read clearer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah, I would start the and.
And then I have a question as it relates to back to school nights, because it's my understanding that we no longer do that anymore. So is that an expectation in this policy that we will be having them?
I think the back to school night language is in state code in the VSBA model. Our back to school night is our open house that we sponsor. I think it's the language that we took is related to if you are having events at the beginning of the school year to kick things off, you are obligated to provide this opportunity.
So this will be then at our open house.
Correct, which is what we did this year. Right.
Would it be clear if that is indeed our practice to say ensures that at any open house or back to school night, like just add open house or?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely can make that change.
You still with us, Ms. Young? Put you on the spot. All right.
I am with you.
Good.
I just clicked off of my agenda. I'm sorry. I'm still with you.
Just checking. Thank you. All right.
EBB, appointment and election of school board members. Based on the committee's perspective, and it made sense to us, we alphabetized the listing of the districts for James City County and changed information to as provided by law, updated legal references.
Then BBFA.
Board member conflict of interest and member ethics. We last revised this in October of 22. There were some code revisions that occurred over the course of the General Assembly session, and VSBA updated their model. You might remember that the board felt like we needed to go with the full conflict of interest and member ethics policy. It is particularly long. The changes there are directly related to the code revisions. For instance, lines 320 to 321 regarding language around foreign country of concern per the VSBA. So there is some specificity within this to better align with state code again.
BCF.
BCF language was added under electronic attendance to clarify virtual attendance options for committee members. This is referred to in the VSBA model policy. We needed to update some information around minutes per our attorney's recommendation, and also added a link to school board standard operating procedure under cross-reference.
And finally, BDDE.
Rules of order. Updated the full title to align with the VSBA model, updated the cross-references, and it's had attorney review and acceptance.
Good. Any comments or questions? Ms. Ortega has one.
Just in general about when we were back at the library 7.04. And
So let's make sure everybody understands. Ms. Young, we're looking back to 7.04.
well, not necessarily the specifics of it, but, and this is nothing personal at all. I'm just curious, are board members encouraged to send in specific language when they would like policy, to submit policy changes? Because I wasn't aware of that process.
We talked about, yeah.
So I can clarify. So we had a conversation in
It was the July meeting.
July meeting where people were throwing in their different ideas of how to address American heritage and the other pieces. So in just taking all of that, I kind of took what I heard and then said, like, put together what I thought I heard from the different people, and I sent it to Dr. Herron and to the policy committee as this is a suggestion for the policy committee to look at as to how to incorporate what was heard.
So moving forward, should we all do that?
I do know that in our retreat this year, we had a lengthy conversation around the policy committee and allowing them to do their work. And similar circumstances like this where we've discussed something in a meeting and kick it back to the policy committee, that we allow them to do our work. I think it's, given the circumstances, how this transpired, maybe we take a look at that, how we address that in our SOP. And I think your question is, do we continue to do what we've seen this time, or
Right.
is it outside of what this board had already agreed on in a board retreat and SOP?
And I think for me, like, to not, because my question would be so that it's not a meeting. So I didn't send it, like,
And
I didn't send it to every, like, I don't know if, like, I can't remember what I did. Like, I think I sent it individually to Ms. Hummel and Mrs. Young because it couldn't be a meeting. Because if I send it to everybody,
I'm not
then
trying
it's
to
a
suggest
meeting.
you did something wrong. I'm just curious if if we have a conversation and we want to submit language suggestions to the policy committee, is that something we can all do?
That's not something for staff to tell us. That's something for the board to determine. And we had a lengthy conversation about that. And in our retreat this year, we said no. So maybe the board wants to consider that again, or maybe we say, you know what, this time we didn't exactly go in accordance with our SOP, and let's just be reminded of that.
I don't recall that we said no to that. I think that in the case of this particular policy, there was a lot of discussion around it. And then sometimes there are policies where there's a lot of discussion about, just like we did tonight, how about if we add this word or that word, or, strike an and, or make this open house and or. And we're able to do that as a group, but then sometimes it means we've got to think about it, the parsing of the words or the exact phrasing of the words, and then you're sending those recommendations to the policy committee. But I can understand where it's a slippery slope. It can become a slippery slope. So in our policy meeting, we went back and forth with Mr. Keever about this, Ms. Young and I, and we're like, we're talking about how we could phrase it, and then we're like, Miss Donner said something that was very similar to what we were discussing that sounded good to us. Right, Mrs. Young? I don't want to speak for you, but I think that was, that's what I remember it happening. So it wasn't as if we just blindly took Mrs. Donner's suggestion.
Right, there were two options. The first option was the option that we initially presented in July. The initial option that we presented in July, we were asked to take a look at again administratively. We talked with the librarians. The policy committee had discussion over what should the version look like, and so we presented both of those as opportunities for the policy committee to review and make a determination on which one they supported.
Because the librarians did not, it went through their review, and they're like, we don't want to change, we're fine with the way the policy was written. And then we knew, Ms. Young and I knew that there was attention being placed on American heritage, and that we wanted American heritage to be recognized in the policy. So it was kind of a compromise with, we're like, we know that the board itself talked in our discussions about the emphasis on American heritage. And that's why we wanted to put it in like that. So it was actually more of a accommodation to the people who had concerns about American heritage being stricken from the policy. Am I saying this correct, Mrs. Young?
Well, yes, we had talked about that, and it ended up being a rather lengthy discussion again in our policy meeting, but and I think contributions to one of the things there in the red line policy where things were stricken out, and where that part that Ms. Donner recommended, instead of using the word American, we went back to change it to the contributions, experiences of, and contributions to the United States. And I think it's up to the school board whether or not they want to leave it out. But for me personally, because we do live in the United States, we are trying to become a united nation of some sorts, and I don't know where that's going. But for me personally, it was important to have the word United States, and I thank Ms. Donner for recognizing that that was important to some people on the school board. So, and I do understand the conflict here, or the issue here of having a school board member sending language to the policy committee, but on the other hand, it was discussed openly in a school board meeting. But I think the school board, if we don't want that to happen, then the school board as a total needs to decide if school board members should have input into the work of the policy committee until, even after it's been presented to the board, or not.
Right. That's,
So
and I'm not saying we shouldn't have that. I'm not saying that was a wrong thing to do. It just would, if that's going to be available to one board member to submit language, then that should be something that is known that all board members can submit language.
right, and that's why I'm saying that if that's something, maybe we need to have another discussion about this.
There is
Mr.
one
Chair.
scheduled. There is one scheduled for February. Ms. Donner.
And just for transparency, so since she's laughing,
got it,
she won't
yeah.
be there.
She got
I mean, just for transparency. So, right, my intention was to summarize the various things that I heard in the room because we weren't able to land, to then give the policy committee something to work from. I sent individual emails. I think I sent one to I think I copied Mr. Keever and maybe Superintendent on the one I sent to each of the policy committee members. And so there were no discussions between me and any of the policy committee members. I didn't send any follow-ups after any of that. So just to be, just for clarity of, it wasn't me as an individual school member trying to push a certain agenda or thing. It was just, I'm trying to be helpful, here are some ideas, and left it at that, and haven't had any conversations about it again until we are in this open forum.
Like words, like you were word.
I was trying to wordsmith it to get to pull together what we'd heard.
And I think maybe that is kind of the difference, and where I do recommend talking about it in a future school board thing. Like it is, sometimes I think we get with policy where one person might feel strongly about one focus and then somebody else has an opposing focus for policy. And I think that's what we don't want necessarily, is to have 7 different people saying, well, this is the way I think it should be written, and this is the way I think it should be written.
I think to Ms. Ortego's raising the question, that's what we had in that meeting. And if we're saying that that's what we do, then that's what the policy committee is going to get. Because Ms. Ortego, Ms. Donner has a well thought out recommendation, then I might have a different well thought out recommendation. So you might get that.
Yeah, you might.
Anyway,
and for the record, I'm really not suggesting that Mrs. Donner was trying to do anything not transparent or that, not at all. It was news to me that we could submit language, so that's all.
Okay. Good. Okay. We'll move on to our action items for the evening. We have 5. If I can have a motion to approve the personnel actions as presented.
Chairman, I move that we approve the personnel actions as presented.
Thank you, Dr. Beers. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Hundley. Ms. Aller?
Dr. Beers.
Aye.
Mrs. Donner.
Aye.
Ms. Hummel.
Aye.
Mrs. Hunley.
Aye.
Mrs. Ortego.
Aye.
Mrs. Young.
Aye.
Mr. Dowell.
Aye. Before we get into these next 3, I think historically when we've approved the advisory committees, we've also provided the names of the members. Is that right? Is that accurate? Ms. Hummel, I'm looking at you. Does that seem right?
We didn't. I thought we didn't. Is that?
Yes, I believe the names are in each of the appointments. They're all listed in the agenda item.
You can hear it.
So you're suggesting reading the names?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
what I'm saying. Yeah, I think we've done that. But before we go any further, you don't remember?
I don't remember reading all the names.
I don't think we've done.
Say that again, Ms. Young.
I don't think we've read the names of the people.
Okay.
But I mean, it's up to the board if they want to. Mr. Chair, I guess you could ask what people want to do.
We have an issue
I
with
don't
reading
think
the
it's
names?
necessary.
Okay. I'm just trying to, keep with what we've done, I think we've done historically, but if we don't have an issue with foregoing the names, we'll just take the motion as is. Is there a motion to approve the appointments to the Career Ready Advisory Committee?
Mr. Chair, I move to approve the appointments to the Career Readiness Advisory Committee.
Is there a second?
Second.
Isn't it for a 2-year term?
Yeah.
Is it?
Or 2-year term
Oh,
ending?
for a 2-year term, ending September 30th, 2025, as presented.
And thank you for your second, Dr. Beers. Ms. Aller?
Mrs. Hunley.
Aye.
Mrs. Ortega. Mrs. Young.
Aye.
Dr. Beers.
Aye.
Mrs. Donner. Ms. Hummel.
Aye.
Mr. Dowell.
Aye. Is there a motion to approve appointments to the Student Advisory Committee?
I
Mr.
move to, sorry, Mr. Chair, I move to approve appointments to the Student Advisory Committee for a 2-year term ending June 30th, 2025, as presented.
Thank you,
Second.
Ms. Hummel. Thank you, Dr. Beers, for the second. Ms. Aller?
Ms. Hummel.
Aye.
Mrs. Hunley.
Aye.
Mrs. Ortega. Mrs. Young.
Aye.
Dr. Beers.
Aye.
Mrs. Donner.
Aye.
Mr. Dowell.
Item 8.4, is there a motion to approve appointments to the Special Education Advisory Committee?
Mr. Chair, I move to approve appointments to the Special Education Advisory Committee for a term of 2 years ending September 30th, 2025, as presented.
Thank you, Ms.
Second.
Huntley. Thank you, Dr. Beers, for the second. Ms. Aller?
Mrs. Hunley.
Aye.
Mrs. Ortega.
Aye.
Mrs. Young.
Aye.
Dr. Beers.
Aye.
Mrs. Donner.
Aye.
Ms. Hummel.
Aye.
Mr. Dowell.
Aye. And finally, is there a motion to approve an amendment to the superintendent contract?
Mr. Chair, I move that the board approve the amended superintendent contract as presented effective October 2023.
Thank you, Dr. Beers. Is there a second for this motion?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Hundley. And Ms. Aller?
Dr. Beers.
Aye.
Mrs. Donner.
Aye.
Ms. Hummel.
Aye.
Mrs. Hunley.
Aye.
Mrs. Ortega.
Aye.
Mrs. Young.
Aye.
Mr. Dowell.
Aye. All right, that takes us to our board member comments for the evening. Dr. Beers, would you like to go first?
Sure, I'll start. I also, I want to make sure that I recognize, again, the incredible custodial staff that we have in all of our schools. We don't use the term spick and span, we don't hear it much anymore. But by God, when you go through those, all of our facilities, they're just incredible. Those floors, I can't say enough about the floors. They're absolutely gorgeous. So kudos to all our custodial staff. And I want to mention again, I am encouraged by the growth, maybe in our in the academic performance of our students. I know that some of us, are disappointed that maybe the growth wasn't as large or go a little farther along, but there has been growth, and I certainly want to recognize the hard work that our teacher, staff, support people have done to help these students get on the ground again firmly and continue to grow. There's still work to be done, but I think I'm encouraged. I also want to recognize and thank every person, every individual who volunteered to be on one of our advisory committees. We would function, but we wouldn't function as well without the input from the various advisory committees we have. So thank you very much for volunteering.
Thank you, Dr. Beers. Ms. Hummel?
Thank you. Yes, I agree about our custodians. They are, as a whole, just such a not only professional group of people who just make our schools shine, but also I'll do a shout out to Mr. Greenett, Matthew Whaley, somebody that is the backbone of the school, the spirit of the school, and it just makes every child feel valued. So I'm glad that we support them in this way. The other thing I already had my say-so about the reports tonight, and I do want to make a comment that an individual teacher can make such an impact, such an incredible impact, positive impact with these results, and rather than, I guess, paying attention to the one or two teachers that might have created an issue here, I want to compliment the 99.9% of the teachers who really went above and beyond to try to get all of our groups, the subgroups, everybody, the grade levels, to catch up as much as possible. So I just wanted to let the teachers themselves know that you do make a difference and we appreciate you. And then on a personal note, we went to Lafayette High School football game on Friday because that is what you do, Friday night lights in WJCC, and it just makes my heart happy, whether it's War Hill, Jamestown, or Lafayette, to see the students that are so excited to be there cheering their team on, to the parents that are videotaping their kids that are in the band or the cheerleaders or the football players, which always, it's just amazing to me that we're like, oh, we had a kid that played football, so of course we're looking at the football game, but there's an equal amount of parents that are there looking at the band, looking at the cheerleaders, looking at their children that are in the stands leading the cheer. So it's just it's a really feel-good thing, and I wish everyone would just go down to their local high school on a Friday night and go watch a football game. It's really fun.
Basketball's coming.
I know.
Ms. Young?
Yes, I too want to thank the custodians. I think as a young teacher, when I first started, I worked in a little three-room schoolhouse, and I think the first thing that happened that really made me notice the custodian is I came in one morning into my classroom, and it was right before Thanksgiving, and he had drawn the most beautiful picture on my blackboard, and the kids were so delighted. And I sometimes think when you see the custodians at school and they're smiling, and sometimes our custodians reach our kids sometimes better than we as teachers do. And I just want to compliment them and thank them for all their hard work. I know that the time that they spend and the effort that they put out, and I do appreciate them. I just want to thank my fellow school board members for letting me attend the meeting tonight, Zoom-wise. And Mr. Chair, I'm sorry that you thought I wasn't paying attention, but I have to keep my foot elevated. So so my foot is elevated, and I've been able to listen, and I enjoyed our conversations tonight. Thank you.
All right, we're keeping tabs on you. Thank you, Ms. Young. And rest up. Ms. Donner?
I echo my colleagues' comments around the custodians. They are such a wonderful part of the school. And I remember just as a new parent coming in and being nervous about the teacher and the custodians, like, oh no, she's a good one. Your child's going to be fine. And I just trusted that advice, and that right, the custodians see and hear everything, and they know the pulse of the kids in the building. And so just appreciate that. And again, thank you to Mr. Walker and Dr. Worley and your teams and all of the data. I mean, it was just wonderful to see all of that and the thought that's going into it. And I know as board members, we have expressed some disappointment, some frustration, some optimism around like what is happening. And I know that we have a long road to climb, especially with some of our students, but I am also really encouraged from all of the conversations we've had around student achievement and how much the administration of this district really cares about it, and as well as in the building. So we have work to do, but I believe that we will do it.
Ms. Hundley?
So as a former teacher, we, even in teacher education, they tell you the first two people to get to know in your school is the custodians and the secretaries, because they know everything. So I definitely appreciate the custodial staff. Also, I think this is the first night I'll ever be commenting on not kids, because I'm excited about getting back into the schools in October. But, and Miss Ortego knows what this skeleton is for, but we went to the Legislative Advocacy Conference and virtually, and we took so many notes. and I was texting her back and forth, but I had 6 pages. She has so many pages. We're going to condense them and bring our report to the board next time. We had so much. But the one thing that I kept hearing the lady talk about was the skeleton. We are in the skeleton version because I don't think people realize the state really does dictate a lot of what we do. So just yesterday I was on a webinar for also on the All In, which you've heard the governor's new initiative, All In. It's going to be for attendance, literacy, and learning. And this big chunk of money is supposed to be coming from the state, although 70% is supposed to go to tutoring, 20% to literacy, 10% to attendance. Schools that have the highest free lunches, not even free and reduced, but free, they're going to get a bulk of money first. But what they kept talking about is all these new initiatives that are coming in is going to be, tied to accreditation and accountability and the new Virginia Literacy Act. It's not going to be until 2026 before we're going to really see the fruits of all that labor. It's still in the skeleton form. There's so much that has to happen before we get to see the fruits of our labor. I see this report, and I know because I've heard the state say it in both of in the meeting I was in and the one we were in, they say teachers have worked their butts off. The state recognizes it. The state's even saying now the communities need to step in. The money for tutoring, some places they're going to have a virtual tutoring. So anybody that wants to tutor in your community will have it virtually to be able to help a student. It's like a playbook. They're actually calling it the All-In playbook. So the skeleton will be broken down a little bit more for you next time when we give our report next month. But it's a lot. We've done a lot of work. We have a lot more work to do. I know we're going to have even more growth with a lot of these initiatives that are coming down from the state, and they really are coming down from the state. And so, but we have to recognize that the teachers and the administrators cannot do it all by themselves. We have to be all in as far as the community as well to be able to go from top to bottom and move our kids along. And I believe we can do it. I'm impressed with the growth we've made, and people keep always saying, well, why aren't we doing what Richmond is doing? We are not like Richmond. We are not like Poquoson. And so, but I do want to know what York County's doing because I do want to be like York County. So I think that's another thing that the state says. There's going to be 8 regions where they're going to go around and talk who's doing well in what areas with attendance and things and share out so that other divisions that are struggling with what you're struggling with can copy and do what you are doing as well. So I've always, as a teacher, had no problems with stealing and borrowing from other people if we're going to get ahead. So kudos to all the teachers out there that are working really hard, and I'm excited for the next group of test results.
Thank you, Ms. Hunley. Ms. Ortego?
Yeah, most everything's been said by the time it gets to me, so I don't like to belabor things that have been said, but congrats to all of our custodians and all the people who are more in the background who really are a central part of everything that we do and really making our schools work, and I'm glad that we were able to highlight them, and that was a nice presentation. Also, thanks again for the performance presentation. This is incredibly helpful information, and it's very easy to see and understand, and it's very transparent, and I know that can be, when it's not the best news, sometimes you might want to not be quite as transparent or kind of push past it, but we didn't do that. We faced it head on, and we are growing in some areas, and obviously in some areas we still have a lot of work to do. And I think it's important and encouraging that we are acknowledging that we're getting together and we're gonna have to figure this out. As our role in this board, I think one of the hardest parts is looking at it from two different perspectives. One is holistically. We have to, as as we look at the whole division and all the data and the numbers, these big numbers that go up and down, and that's something that we have to take into consideration for accreditation, for comparisons to other divisions, and those are important when we do grow, even by small steps. That's a huge push that made those small steps happen, and so we have to acknowledge that. At the same time, we also have to think of the individual student who didn't pass the SOLs, the individual third grader who can't read, the individual eighth grader who's going to struggle to get through high school because of learning gaps. And when that student gets to the end of their career in our schools, that student is not going to say, well, at least my division did better than Bedford County. That's just not reality. So while we evaluate ourselves that way as a whole, and we have to, and that's good, we just can't forget the individual student. So that's my comment.
Thank you, Ms. Origo. I want to say, I'll keep my comments brief. I want to thank Dr. Herron, you and your staff for making this really a well done, efficient meeting, very well prepared. Again, appreciate all the information, the data points, and it's been mentioned several times, the transparency within the information that's been provided. So thank you for that. And I appreciate the commitment that we've received from you and your team, Dr. Herron, that we're continuing to push forward to address the issues that are present, that we see and can recognize. I want to thank the board, too, for a great meeting. I think this was a good one. We had a lot of good, meaningful conversation is what I'm trying to say, meaningful conversation that's going to be impactful for the foreseeable future. And so it's been a great work session, and I appreciate everybody giving the best effort at it, including Ms. Young. Move on to upcoming events. We've got the Career Ready Advisory Committee meeting on October 11th at 3:30 in this room at the Annex, room 300. The Special Education Advisory Committee meeting on the 12th of October at 6:30 here in room 300. The Policy Committee is meeting on the 18th of October at 8:30 in the morning, room 203 of Central Office. And then the Student Advisory Committee meeting on the 25th of October at 3 p.m. at the War Hill High School Media Center. That's on Opportunity Way. Next meetings, closed session followed by regular meeting with a public hearing on the recommended CIP plan. That's October 17th at 6 and 6:30. Beginning here for the closed session, and then the James Blair Middle School Gymnasium, 6:30. And then November 14th, got a little bit of a break before the next closed session and work session. November 14th, 4 and 4:30 here in the Annex. I do believe our agenda is set for the 17th, placing 12 policies that have been reviewed today on a consent agenda. And that is it. Thank you all. Have a good evening.